Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, whatever part of the world you are tuned in from. This is Funny Like a Clown Podcast. I'm your host, Dennis Wirth, February 9th, 2021. This is episode 98. As always, Funny Like a Clown Podcast is brought to you today by G Vegas Buffalo Sauce. For the spicy, sweet, savory taste at game time, there's only one G Vegas available at www.gvegas.webs.com. Go there, get it shipped right to your house, go green. And, you really don't want to go out shopping in this kind of pandemic. So when you can get food shipped to your house, I guess that's a good thing. 2021, we're getting out of 2020. Maybe things will get back to normal, but we do comedy here. Today on the phone, I have a comedian who the Boston Globe described as one of the top names in New England stand-up comedy. He's a regular on the Boston comedy scene, and I had the privilege of working with him way back. One funny guy, Stephen Bjork. Welcome to the show.
Hey there, Dennis. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for calling in. How's life treating you with the pandemic and everything going on?
Life is treating me like a baby treats a diaper. We are in 2021, but I got some stank of 2020 just hanging all around me.
Kind of shook us all up, yeah. But I mean, you've accomplished quite a bit in the comedy business. But take us back to the start. How did you get started in comedy? What gave you the itch or the bug to get in the business?
Well, it started pretty early for me. At 7 years old, I heard a Bill Cosby album, and that was it. At 7, I decided that's what I'm going to do. And
wow.
Yeah.
You never wavered from that from 7 years old? Yeah, wow.
That was it. That was it. From 7 years old on, that's the only thing I ever wanted to do. And so when I was freshman in college in the Boston area, there was a comedy club that opened up right near my campus. I went to Salem University, Salem State at the time. And there was a comedy club called Stevie D's Comedy Tonight. And this was right in the boom. This was 1987.
Comedy boom.
Oh, yeah. So I got a job there as a doorman, so I could kind of learn how to get into the business. And I made a lot of great connections. I saw all the Boston legends there, and finally got my courage up and did my first open mic at the original Stitches Comedy Club on Calm Ave in Boston in 1987, 88. I think it was 87. And it went very, very mediocre. And at the time, I thought, well, if you don't kill them right off the bat, then you're not supposed to be a comedian. So I thought that was it for me.
There's a hump you got to get over for sure, yeah.
Yeah, so it took me 3 more years before I got back on stage in 1990. And from there, I never stopped.
Well, you mentioned being a doorman and, you wanted to learn the craft before you gave it a try, which, the kids today, they don't get that. They think they headline their first week in comedy, but, I mean, how long have you been doing comedy for exactly?
So from 1990 till now.
Okay, so, I mean, in that many years, what's the biggest thing you've seen change in comedy over the years?
Well, the number one thing I've seen is the idea, when I started, the biggest question that you had to answer was, are you funny? Now, it seems like the biggest question you have to answer is, how many followers do you have on social media?
How many guests can you bring to the show, right?
Exactly. That is, and as a dinosaur, that's something I kind of picked up on way too late. And that certainly hurt me. But I will say, I've been doing it since, but I took a few years off because I got married and was having a family and decided that I better be a responsible guy and stop chasing this. I took a few
That'll
years
slow you down, a family, sure.
Yeah, I took a few years where I wasn't doing it at all, and then circumstances changed where I had an opportunity to get back on the stage. And so here's the thing. I got a day job, and Friday would roll around, and I'd be exhausted, and I was like, I don't feel like going out and doing a show tonight. And I thought to myself, who the hell am I? Somebody's going to pay me to go up on stage and tell jokes, and I don't feel like doing it.
You're too tired to go out, right?
I don't belong in this business anymore. So that's primarily why I got out. And then after a few years, it's something, and Dennis, you know this. Once you get hooked, once you find some success, there's really there's no way to leave it.
It's an addictive hobby. There's no high like it. When you got, a few hundred people hanging on the edge of their seats to hear the next words coming out of your mouth, you can't even explain that until you've experienced it. Yeah.
You really cannot. It is something that unless you experience it, there's no way to compare it to anything else. And of course, I think that's why so many comedians over the years have gone to drugs, alcohol, and depression, because you have that exhilaration for a half hour, 45 minutes, and then you get off and you're all by yourself in a hotel room or all by yourself in the car on the ride home.
You're right.
And it's a crash that...
I've had nights I couldn't even get to sleep. You're so high from being on stage, then you get off it, and that high still, like, what do you do to replace that? You can't wait to get back on, but...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're right. That's why they turn to drugs. Comics, they look for that high on stage, off stage, and a lot of drugs, that's how they find it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that kind of always kept me grounded was I'd go home, just go, you wouldn't believe it, honey. The 500 people thought I was hysterical. And she's like, that's terrific. Go take out the garbage,
So then you're back to reality, right?
Brings you back down. Keeps your feet on the ground.
There you go. But, among your success, I saw you've toured the country. So, what's it like being a road comic as compared to, like, a home-based comic, family comic?
Well, I couldn't survive on the road these days. It's not the same.
A lot of people say they don't like living out of a suitcase. It's tough. Did you find that tough?
As a single guy, no. It was the best. It was the best life in the world.
Right.
But I couldn't imagine doing that with a family. It's just I couldn't picture it, because I'd be away for 4, 6, 8 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
But back then too, comedy was still so big that you'd go out and you'd work 6, sometimes 7 nights a week.
Wow.
But now, over the last number of years, you go out, you might work 3 or 4 nights a week, and then the hotel bills for the nights off are on you.
Yeah.
So it's a lot tougher to make money to survive out there.
Must turn into a blur after a while. You're doing it 6 nights a week every week. 1 week must seem like every week's the same one. Turn into a big blur for you, I imagine, right?
Yeah, I'd be traveling all over the Midwest, and every city kind of started to seem like the same. Absolutely.
So, all the traveling you did, what are some of the favorite spots you can remember, like, that was a great spot for me? Where did you enjoy?
I'll tell you, Louisville, Kentucky. The Comedy Caravan is the name of the club. It's right in Louisville, Kentucky, and that is absolutely, to this day, one of my favorite clubs in the country.
Right.
It's set up perfectly. It's got a great sound booth and videographer, tape all your sets if you want. The audiences are intelligent and fantastic. Lexington, Kentucky was great too. Believe it or not, Rapid City, South Dakota was great, because that's not a place that people go to on vacation around here. But for 3 days, there's a ton to do in Rapid City. There's Mount Rushmore, the Crazy Horse, the Badlands, Devil's Tower. So it's a really cool place to be. And that's one of my favorite things about comedy, was that I got to see places and things and do things that I wouldn't ordinarily do. Certainly Vegas was amazing to do. And then the West Coast is just fantastic.
Now, are you originally from Boston?
Yes, I grew up in just 10 minutes north of Boston.
Did you ever get in trouble with your Boston accent, or like a Boston joke? You ever had to explain a joke? Because I know you mentioned down south, you're in the Bible Belt. Like, some of the stuff we say here in Boston, you can't say down there. What was it like adjusting to some of the crowds?
It's a great question. My first road gig started out in Columbus, Nebraska in 1991. And my first set on that tour, that was like a 6-week tour, I absolutely bombed, because I didn't realize, number one, how thick my Boston accent was, and number two, how many local references I was depending on.
Right.
So I literally, after that show, I went back to the hotel and had to completely revamp my set, and I made a conscious effort to pronounce my R's, and then the rest of the tour went well. The next night was a little better. The next night was a little better than that. And then it got to the point where I was really comfortable and having a ball. But
it was a learning experience for you.
When you stick in one spot, the local references will just creep into your act without you realizing it.
Realizing it, right. What?
In Columbus, Nebraska, I did a rush hour joke. They didn't have any rush hour out there in Columbus, Nebraska.
Didn't know what you were talking about.
Report on the radio, it would have been, yeah, we got a car heading east. Back to you, Bob.
I did a gig like that in Maine. It said, geez, a McDonald's off this exit. I got off the exit. I'm looking around like, where's that? Oh, it's 5 miles down the road. I'm like, 5 miles is right off the exit? Well, yeah, in Maine it is, yeah. Down here in Mass, it's right off. The second you get off, there it is, like.
Yeah, exactly.
But, no, I know. I was up in Alaska one time. I don't remember the joke. I used the word friggin' in a joke, and the rest of the night, friggin'. I'm like, well, that's a Boston thing, I guess. Nobody knew what the hell I was talking about, but, so it's definitely adjustment. But, now, you mentioned the 80s. I mean, in the 80s, we all grew up listening, the Kennisons and the Dice Clays and the Eddie Murphys. But, I mean, I remember years ago, I don't remember what it was, I worked a golf club with you. I opened for you there. You work clean. I mean, and, that's where the money is. They say you work clean, you always work. If you work dirty, you have fun. But it's not always a big paid thing. But, I mean, was that a conscious effort for you to work clean? Or was it just who you are? Or was it from listening to Cosby? Or what caused that?
It was a conscious effort, and I'll tell you why. So my first exposure was Bill Cosby, and from 7 to, 10 or 11, I collected every album he made. And then I was probably 12, 13, and Eddie Murphy was on Saturday Night Live, and he came out with his first album. So my mother went out and got his album for me.
Yeah.
We sat down as a family thinking it would be suitable, and it was the most uncomfortable 15 minutes of my life before, my father said, you know what, I think we've probably heard enough of this.
A little awkward listening with the family, that's sure.
Yeah, and it was, I'll tell you, it was tough, is pretending I wasn't getting the jokes. So I decided, actually, right then, you know what, I'm going to work, when I become a comedian, I'm going to work clean just so there's, the whole family can listen to me. And that's that's what I always did. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Eddie Murphy.
Right.
I loved Kinnison and all of. I'm not a prude. I don't disapprove of dirty comedy in any way, shape, or form, especially if it's done well. But it's just kind of been my style to just clean.
You want to put butts in the seats. I mean, if you do a show where you can bring mom and dad with you and you can bring the kids with you, you're going to fill more seats than, hey, I got to go see this by myself, because like you said, you don't want people to know you're getting the references where it's a certain number of people. But that leads to more money, like I said, and it leads to corporate gigs. Now, you've done a lot of corporate gigs, so tell us, what's the difference between a corporate gig and a regular gig?
Well, part of it is expectations from your perspective. Like a corporate audience is generally going to be more subdued, and they're going to be, before they laugh, they're almost invariably going to be looking at the HR director to make sure it's okay to laugh, even at the clean material. So corporate gigs, you don't generally get the same type of response you get from a club gig. And the other thing is, you've got to usually, there was a point in my career where I couldn't open anymore. Opening a show is a different skill set than walking in after the audience is warmed up. So I had to, when I started doing corporate stuff, I had to relearn how to first create a bond and relax the audience, as opposed to just jumping into material. So that's part of corporate. Generally, 99.9% of the time, you're the only entertainment at that event. There's no opening act. The crowd's not relaxed and settled for it yet.
Well, did you ever notice this in comedy? Because I noticed this myself. I thought, hey, if I keep getting funnier, I'll get more work. And the funnier I got, I found I got less work, because the headliner don't want you stealing the show from them. They want to get the big laughs. They don't. That's why they put restrictions, on their openers sometimes. But I mean, did you ever find you were starting to get too funny to just be an opener, that you had to headline? You were forced into it, or?
Oh no, Dennis, I've never been very funny. So that's never been a problem.
No, I opened for you. You had the crowd. You were very funny. Don't hand me that. You don't do corporate gigs unless you know what you're doing. You ain't fooling me with that one. But I mean,
it's funny. It's funny that you posed that question that way. I'm not sure if I've ever heard it, but that's really accurate. There's a stage where you become too funny to middle, but people aren't ready to headline you yet. That's a tricky path to navigate, because really the the best way to get your headlining spot is to blow the headliner out of the water. But you only do that a few times before that headliner doesn't.
Yeah, it works against you after a while. Yeah, it does. So.
And it's funny whenever I hear some people that their whole resume is open for this comic, open for that comic, open for that comic, and you know what? I guess those are good credits to some degree, but I've always thought that I guess you were a safe opener.
Yeah. Well, it sells tickets, associating your name with the big acts. That's he's worked with that guy. It sells tickets. Like if you put down, I headlined the Knights of Columbus and Little Town USA. Nobody's really impressed with that, even if it was a great night.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't know how much you want to talk about it if you don't, because some comics don't want to get into it. But I mean, it is a political arena. I've always said there's 3 sides of comedy. There's the political side, the business side, and the being funny side. And the being funny side usually comes in last. It's who you know and what circle you're in comedy. But I mean, have you ever had trouble with the politics in comedy? If you work for that one, you can't work for this one. If you work that room, you can't work this room. Or what's that been like for you?
Oh, sure. Over the years, that has definitely come up. I have, you know what? I don't think I'm much of a political animal. I just tend to get along with just about everybody, and that's helped.
It's not easy to do.
Yeah, there was, back in the day, there was the Nix comics, the Connection comics, and the Catch comics. I don't know. I don't think you go that far back. But those were the 3, and you tended to work for one of those 3. I was very fortunate that I got to, I got to work. The Connection. I was mostly known as a Connection comic. That's who gave me most of my work. But Nix would use me here and there. Catch would use me here and there. The politics today don't seem to be as divided. Like you can work Giggles and the Kowloon. They get along with each other.
Right.
You can work for Laugh Boston and all of their rooms still work for Giggles. It really for me. It comes down to getting along with the booking agent. There's definitely, and I certainly won't mention them, but there's a booking agent or 2 in town that just, I'm not their style, or we haven't connected well enough, so I don't get work from them. But but I've been around for a long time too. When you're coming up, I think politics plays a bigger role.
Well, there was a guy, I won't mention his name, in Boston. They called him Tricky, and he owned a line of clubs. And I know, he recently retired, and I know he was famous for that. That you ain't working my room, and being a powerhouse, you couldn't really go out on your own, because if you couldn't work his room, he'd bring you down in comedy. So, but it is getting away from that, I guess now. Yeah.
Yeah, he was big on that. And that hurt me once in a while. I generally was in with him, but I think everybody has been on the outs with him from time to time.
You never know, right?
Yeah.
Well, it still survives a little. Well, you did a lot of the casinos too. I mean, what are some of your favorite casinos to play? And did you ever have trouble with a gambling problem? I mean, or hey, I'm here, I'm in a casino. You do your hour show, and I get all kinds of time in a casino. Did that lead to any tricks for you?
I like to play blackjack. I like to play hold'em. But I learned really early that, because the club would be happy to front your pay, by the way. Usually you get paid at the end of the week. They're more than happy to give you that pay right up front, because they want you to spend it.
Oh, they want you to get it back, right.
Yeah, but I learned very quickly, and I never had a gambling problem. That wasn't one of my big problems.
Well, you're better than a lot of comics do, but what were some of your favorite casinos to play?
Well, the Riviera was the first one, certainly the first one in Vegas, and actually, I haven't done Vegas in a number of years, but I really loved the Riviera. I was really sad when they tore that down. But my favorite of all the casinos all over the country is the Borgata in Atlantic City. It's off of the boardwalk. It's self-contained, very much like a Vegas casino. You can stay on that campus for a week and have a ball and never leave. And they had a 900-seat theater, and they would fill it 7 nights a week, and that's what the gig was. You worked for 7 nights, and it was absolutely fantastic. The crowds were absolutely out of this world. And one little thing that you'll appreciate, they actually had a clock on the floor of the stage. It kind of tilted up so you could see it very easily. And instead of just showing the time, they'd have a timer counting down. So however much time you were going to do, it starts there and counts down. So it was really easy to
Right.
stick to your time.
Well, they don't want you going over your time because that's less time people are out in the casino gambling. So, you know, they want you, the show will bring you in there. Then once you're there, get done, get out gambling. And I know a lot of casinos, the mic will go dead if you go over your time, but they don't want you going over. So,
yeah, that's something that, you know, I don't understand about the newer comedians. I don't think they've been educated appropriately. I don't necessarily think it's their fault, but when I started out, for instance, at the Connection on Warrington Street, if you had 5 minutes, that's how much time you did. Nobody was going to give you a light, and if you went over, you weren't invited back for a few months.
yeah, they say 5. They didn't mean 5:01. They meant 5.
Yeah, you were responsible for your time, and if you didn't stick to your time, especially when you knew, you think, oh, they're loving me, I'm killing. I'm going to stay up here because they're loving me, and the club must love that they're loving me. The club doesn't. They don't. They've got 100 guys that the crowd is going to love. They want you to stick to your time, make them laugh while you're up there, and then get off.
That's it, yeah. It's a whole new generation. I mean, these young kids, I deal with it a lot. I try to do a lot of shows to help them out, and everybody thinks they're the next George Carlin. They don't realize, you know, I got 100 kids who think they're the next George Carlin. It ain't going to work out for you, you know. I mean, I was smart enough to listen when I got in the business. They don't want to listen nowadays, but...
I was talking to an open micer a couple of years ago. Really nice kid. But I noticed he wasn't wearing a watch. I said, you know, how do you know how much time that you're doing? He goes, oh, I know how much, you know, I know how much of my material takes 10 minutes. I go, yeah, but what if the crowd, you know, messes you up by laughing?
The one he's got their cell phone out, they're timing themselves on their cell phone. I'm like, no, cell phone, and then it's like they're picking it up and checking it, looking at it, and it's like, yeah, that ain't gonna work, kid, but, you know, hey, the ones who listen, those are the ones who get ahead. The ones who don't, you know, they're Facebook. They perform on Facebook because that's the only crowd they can get, I guess. But
yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about something more positive. I mean, I don't usually go outside of comedy, but I'm going to make the exception for now. You know, when I went to contact you on Facebook, I saw your cover photo. You had a beautiful family there, and you know, in reading your stuff on your website, you mentioned that you were a foster parent and later adoptive parents, and you know, doing that, some of these kids, they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, and you were actually a keynote speaker at the State House for the National Alliance of Mental Health. So how did that all come about in your life? Because, I mean, everybody's been touched by somebody in their family has that kind of stuff going on. So how did that come into your life?
Well, we had heard about this situation where these 4 kids had a rough start, and they were going to be, they'd been brought into the Department of Children and Families, and they were going to be going into foster homes, and they couldn't find a foster home that would take all 4 of them, all 4 siblings. It's a long story how we even heard about it, but we got involved, and you know, it's certainly one of the best things. These kids are absolutely fantastic. They do have their struggles, and one of the things that I think is great nowadays, as opposed to when I was a kid, is people understand that mental illness is real. It exists. It's not a choice, and it's not a kid being a bad kid. It's a kid trying to survive. Right. So, because of my experience there, and with the foster system, and my foster care worker certainly saw what I did for a living and asked me to be a speaker at a parent appreciation night for foster parents. And then it kind of snowballed from there. And I've done a number of shows for foster groups, for adopted groups, and a number of shows for mental health facilities, mental health organizations, and so forth. And it's really satisfying to do that and kind of put a light on something that Gary Goldman actually did such a tremendous job in his last special, which was The Great Depression, where he really shined a light on himself and his struggles with depression.
Yeah, like a Robin Williams, yeah. Who knew, you know? I say, look at Robin Williams. Who knew, you know? Who knew he suffered from depression? A guy like that. It can happen to anybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's a couple of Amy T does a lot of work with mental
Yep.
health
Sweetheart comedy.
organizations
Yeah.
as well. Yep. And it's it's satisfying work because there are a lot of people out there who are wonderful people that have struggles that they don't show with a limp, they don't show with a scar, but they are real struggles and illnesses.
Now, there's an old saying in comedy. They say laughter is the best medicine. I mean, do you find that humor is a good way to deal with stuff like that?
I got to tell you, I think humor is absolutely the best way to deal with it. I mean, there are times when you have to cry, but there are other times when you can choose to laugh. And I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of inappropriate jokes if it gets you through a situation.
Sure.
Yeah, it's whatever it takes to keep you moving forward and keep you smiling. That's what keeps you healthy.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been that myself. I mean, I got a day job. I make good money. I mean, I'd rather go do a benefit show and help somebody out rather than, I mean, I understand if comedy's all you do and you're a working comic, you got to get paid to do it. But I get a bigger charge out of helping people out than I do getting the paid gigs. That's me personally. But, I understand if you're a working comic, you got to get paid. But
I'll tell you this too, Dennis. When I was really resistant to bring my kid's situation into my act. And actually, it's funny. I mentioned the Borgata earlier. I was working with this guy at the Borgata, and he challenged me to go on stage that night and do a routine. And I said, I didn't even prepare anything. He goes, I don't care, just wing it. So I did, and what I found just that first night was that after the show, instead of people going, hey, oh man, you're really funny, and then walking away, I'd hear people would say, hey, you're really funny. And I was in the foster care system when I was a kid, or we're foster parents. And then I'd hear their stories, and what I found was an amazing difference between just being a funny guy and making people laugh,
yeah,
as opposed to making them laugh and connecting.
I can relate to that a lot, actually. Yeah, because I do a lot of. I'm a father's rights activist for a child's right to both parents equally, and when I first started out, I did that myself. I incorporated it into my comedy, and almost after every comedy show, I had somebody chasing me down in the parking lot. Dude, wait up! I want to tell you my story. It's strange how you can touch people through comedy. Really, I can relate to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, good for you and the work you do. Hope that inspires some other people to do the same. So let's move on. Other than comedy, you're also an actor. You've appeared in Kevin James' comedy, Here Comes the Boom. Tell us a little bit about that.
That really shouldn't even be on my resume. I basically was a featured extra on that. And if you at a certain point in the movie, if you pause it and get close to the screen, you see my character, which I describe as dismissive man. Kevin James is being taken out from the ring in a stretcher. The premise of the movie is he's becoming this ultimate fighter, and he has no business getting in the ring. Right. But he's being taken out in a stretcher, and I'm just looking at him in a very dismissive way. But most of the work that I've done has been in commercials.
What are some of your favorite commercials you've done? Because you've had more success in that than you have, the big screen. But you got to start. I mean, being a cameo role like that, it's like doing an open mic. You got to start somewhere in acting. That's where you started. But you've been very successful in commercials. What are some of the bigger ones you've done?
So I've done Olympia Sports, and then I did a great commercial for Bauer Hockey, which didn't get the kind of distribution that I thought it would. It was a funny commercial about the premise of the commercial is that you can become your favorite hockey player by using Bauer hockey equipment. So I'm playing this manager at like a sub shop, and I'm yelling at this kid to hurry up with the grilled cheese or the steak and cheese. And the kid is on his phone looking at Bauer hockey equipment, and all of a sudden he places the order, and he transforms into Andrei Vasilevsky. I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, but he's a terrific guy. But Vasilevsky, who's the goalie for the Tampa Bay Lightning. And so I come walking in after he's transformed, and I just start yelling at him to get working on that steak and cheese. And come on, Vasilevsky, get your head in the game, and that kind of thing. And it's a pretty funny commercial.
Now, you mentioned all these great things you've done. I mean, playing the Borgata, playing Vegas, playing this. I mean, and appearing in movies with Kevin James and stuff. I mean, was this just making connections in comedy, or did you get an agent to get these things, or how did you stumble upon these gigs?
Well, I've never. To get an agent, you've already got to have something in the bag.
Right.
So what I've done is use casting agents. Boston Casting has got me a number of commercials.
I mean, were you friends with Kevin James? Did you know him, or how did you end up with Kevin James? That's a big name in comedy.
Yeah, no, that was not through any connections. But it's funny, a bunch of my friends, Jeff McKinney, Richie Mineverli, a bunch of them were in that movie because they were friends with Kevin. I got to, hang out a little bit with Henry Winkler, who was in that movie, and he was a terrific guy. Kevin was all business on that set. And I'm sure he's a terrific guy, but I never got to see that side of him. He was just all business.
So now what about all these big casinos you played in that? I mean, how do you get into those? Is it just a matter of word of mouth how funny you are, or was there a booking agent there? Or?
Yeah, it was word of mouth. Like the Borgata, for instance, I was doing a show in Boston, and the booking agent happened to be at that show. It was for the Boston Comedy Festival, and I was doing a hosting for one of their quarterly finals. And the booking agent came up and said, "I'd love to have you at the Borgata. Here's my card. Give me a call."
There you go. You never know who's watching you, right? You're in a show. You never know who's in the audience, do you?
Yeah, I'll tell you something. I'll tell you a funny story. That same show, I got a car. This guy approached me from CBS, and he gave me his card. He said, "We'd love to talk to you about working together." And so I called, and they set up a meeting with me and the senior president, or the president of casting, and the assistant, or the vice president of casting with CBS. I went down to New York City, had a meeting with them, just the two of them and me in an office. We chatted for about 25 minutes, and they, said, "We're interested in working with you." And I walked away, and I was at the elevator, and they sent a page running after me. Said, "Mr. Bjork, we'd like you to come back in." And I said, "Okay." So they said, "We were talking after you left. We really do want to work with you. In fact, we're thinking about doing something around you. So, do you mind? Can we get you to do a few lines on camera?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So I did. We went in this room with the camera and the script. I did some lines, and I walked out of there and got on the plane back to Boston, thinking, "That's it. I got a ticket.
I'm a made man."
Yeah, and then the follow-up was I never heard from them again. So
yeah, you never know, right?
That's the way showbiz works.
Welcome to the business, right there. Oh wow. Well, other than the acting stuff, I guess you took a dab into being a writer also, and you put out a book, Almost Domesticated. So tell us a little bit about what made that come about.
So there was a point in my life where I just was looking for outlets and things to do to keep busy, and I actually started writing for my local newspaper, and then I started doing a weekly humorous column. So Almost Domesticated is kind of a combination of a bunch of those columns, some stuff that I had not previously published, and then several true tales from the road, my experience of traveling the country doing comedy. It is the feedback I've gotten is that it is very funny. It is available on Amazon. One of my favorite reviews was, "It's like chicken soup for the soul, but for the mildly disturbed."
All right, so go ahead and give your website a plug here for the listeners. If they wanted to check out you and all your stuff here, where would they go to check you out?
Yeah, well, boy, how much of a dinosaur am I to still say www? My website is stevebjork.com. That's last name is BJORK. So stevebjork.com.
All right. So there's a link. If they want to purchase it, they can purchase it. There must be a link there, right?
There is a link there, or if they go on Amazon and either search for me as the author, Steve Bjork, or the title Almost Domesticated.
Almost Domesticated. All right. So you mentioned all these great things. I mean, if you had to look back, well, what would be the high point in your comedy career? If it was ever a moment you sat there and said, "Wow, I can't believe I'm doing this."
Well, boy, there's so many.
Tough to choose.
Yeah. You know what? So I'll say this. First of all, at about the 15-minute mark of my meeting with CBS, that thought occurred to me. I can't believe that I'm actually sitting here and being considered for television.
Right.
So that was one of those moments. Certainly, every night I was at the Borgata, I had that same.
Who knew when you were a doorman it would have led to all that, right?
Well, when I was a doorman, I pictured myself selling out arenas. That's never happened.
That's everybody's dream, but reality, right? Yeah, okay. Well.
But even you asked me about my favorite clubs around the country, but I got to tell you, even a lot of the one-nighters that I did out in the Midwest, for instance.
Yeah.
I just got that feeling like I'm a working comedian. I'm out. I'm on the road. I'm actually living the dream that I've had since I was 7 years old. So I got to tell you, Dennis, it's pretty much every time I get on stage, I have that feeling you're talking about.
Every night's a blessing, yeah.
And I mentioned that there was a time when I didn't feel like going out on a Friday night to do a show. I took those few years off, and then I never ever took it for granted again.
Right.
I can't tell you, I'm at this point at my age, and with the roots that I have set right now,
yeah.
I'll probably never be a big star. I'll never be a TV star, but I feel like the luckiest guy in the world to be able to get on stage and make people laugh.
You get to do what you love to do, absolutely, yeah. All right,
you know what? You talk about those moments. I'll tell you about a moment real quick if we have time.
Yeah, go.
I'll tell you about a moment that I squandered. It was 1996. I had moved out to LA for about a minute. I missed my girlfriend, who then became my wife. I missed her too much, and I was struggling financially because you don't make much money out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to move home, and that's what I got. I moved home and got married and got a day job. So I'm home for like a month, and I'm at my day job. And my wife, my girlfriend at the time, she calls me and goes, "Steve, there's this casting agent from LA who's looking to get a hold of you." I said, "Okay, what's the number?" So I call, and she goes, well, let me preface this by saying, you remember they made live-action Flintstones with John Goodman?
Yeah.
Okay. So she says, Steve, listen, we're making a prequel to the Flintstones. We're looking for a young John Goodman. And I've heard your name a couple times. I've seen your headshot. I'd love for you to come out and audition for this part.
Wow.
And at that point, I said, I really kind of made up my mind. I'm not chasing anymore. So I said, I appreciate that, but I'm not chasing this anymore. But I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And she goes, you sure? I heard your name a number of times. I go, no, I really am. But thank you anyway. So she calls me back a couple days later. And she goes, look, Steve, every time I talk about this project, I keep hearing your name. And people say you're funny. How about if we move the audition to New York City? Would you do it then? I said, no, I think so, but thank you anyway. So that was, now, you and I are in the business, so we know. That doesn't mean I had the part by any stretch.
Yeah, long shot, but long shot's better than no shot in this business, yeah.
But that story, civilians love that story because they...
Who knows? One of those great, who knows what would have happened.
And hypothetically, they made the movie. The guy who played Fred Flintstone was Mark Addy, who then went on to be in a sitcom married to Jamie Gertz, and then went on to be King Baratheon on Game of Thrones. So hypothetically, I could have been TV married to Jamie Gertz and been King Baratheon on Game of Thrones.
Living the dream. Who knows what could have happened? But hey, we've all, I found out you can't be everywhere. I mean, it's just kind of like nothing happens and everything happens at once, and you can't be everywhere all the time. So you got to pick and choose your spots, and sometimes you make the right choices, sometimes you don't.
Exactly. Right?
What are you gonna do?
Again, just because I auditioned didn't mean anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's a long road. It's a dirty road. We know that, but so you've been doing it for years. You experienced great success. Like you said, you're the luckiest man in the world. You're doing what you love to do. Then all of a sudden, boom! This pandemic hits comedy. How's that affected you, and how do you think it's affected comedy?
So from mid-March, my last show before the pandemic was March 18th.
Wow.
And I was lucky enough to double that night in 2 shows. And then I didn't get on stage again until mid-May when Tupelo Hall up in New Hampshire. By the way, you asked my favorite clubs. That's one of my favorite venues, too. Tupelo Hall is amazing.
Okay.
They did a parking lot show.
How did that go for you?
What's that?
How did that go for you?
Well, it was interesting. You get on the stage. I was very rusty, for sure. And everybody was out in the parking lot really far away. So there's this millisecond between when you expect the response and when the response actually came, which definitely throws you off for a little while until you get used to it. But that March 18th to May 15th, that was the longest stretch I hadn't done comedy since 1990.
Right.
So,
well, here it's like if they beep their horn, that's a laugh.
I took a couple years off, but other than that stretch. Anyway, then from May 15th through the end of December, I consider myself very fortunate because I was able to work on average once a week. And
that's very lucky.
I was used to working 3 or 4 nights a week. So that has been tough. And now in January, the shows are, January, February, the shows have been tough to come by.
Now, is it in Mass you're working, or where are you working? Because I know each state has different laws. I mean, there ain't much of Mass going.
There's just about nothing going on in Mass.
Yeah.
Previously, I'd been working mostly in New Hampshire, a number of things in Connecticut. But now I've done all those things, so you got to wait for for enough time to go by before you return to those things.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I mean, it's a different thing. When you're in a parking lot, they say what, like beeping their horn, that's considered a clap, or if they flick their lights, that's an applause. Or I mean, how different was it compared to having them right on top of you in a room?
No, it's not. It's apples and oranges. There's no comparison. All it is just the satisfaction of being on stage and seeing people's faces, but it's not. It's certainly not the same.
Have you tried any of these online shows? Is that for you or no?
The Zoom shows. So I've done a number of Zoom shows, and I will tell you, they're not as painful as I expected.
Really?
Especially if they're done right. Like the audience can't be muted. If they're muted, it's just you might as well be doing it in front of a mirror.
Right.
But if if you can hear them laugh, and you got to learn how to do it. Like you can't just jump right into material. You kind of have to acknowledge the situation and talk about the Zoom atmosphere, and then you get into material.
There you go. So let's say, I mean, Eddie Brill on, and he said, comedy always survives. So there's going to be a point in time where we're all back to normal. We don't know when that is yet, but there's going to be in the future, where we're back to doing regular stuff. I mean, you've accomplished so much. What's in your future? Is there anything left that you'd want to accomplish in comedy, or any goals you have left, things you want to do that you haven't done yet, or?
Well, I got to tell you, I would love to get some real TV. I'd love to do some real acting. But my first love is doing stand-up comedy, and I don't care if it's a VFW hall or the Borgata Casino. I'm just very, very happy just to be up there making people laugh.
Keep doing what you're doing. All right. Now, you mentioned you're a headliner. You do this a lot. You see a lot of the young comics. Are there any young comics you'd give us? Who's the future of comedy in your eyes? Are you any names that really stood out to you, some young comics?
Well, I'll tell you, Dennis. There's I will name a few, but I'm hesitant because I've actually run into a bunch lately that I think have real potential and are good people, and that's the first thing I look at is good people.
Right.
For instance, Andrew Delavolpe, I think is very talented. I think he's going to do very well. Jaylene Tran is very clever, and she's got a really unique point of view. See, now I'm kind of blanking on some of the people, but those are the two, probably because those are the two I've seen most recently.
Right.
But there's a bunch of young people out there that I think they're going to do well.
Future of comedy's bright, sure. All right, well, we're approaching an hour, so I'll give you your final question here, and I want to thank you for being on Funny Like Clown podcast. You're a veteran of the comedy scene. We get a lot of young comics who tune in this podcast. They want to travel the road you've already traveled, so if you had some advice for the young comics coming up, what would your advice to them be to make it in this business?
Be on time, and on time means early. Do stick to your time. Be a good person so people want to work with you, and be funny.
There's no magic package. That's it. Just be a good person, do what you do, and you get to do what you love to do.
And there is no substitute for stage time. Sometimes I'll see a comic say, "You know what? I don't think I'm going to go up tonight." And that's an attitude I've never understood. every chance you can get to get on that stage is a learning experience and will bring you closer to your goals.
You only get better. Good advice. Stephen Bjork, Boston comedian, thank you so much for being on Funny Like Clown podcast. I wish you luck in the future, and thanks for calling in.
Dennis, thanks for having me.
All right, take care. We'll see you soon on the same. Bye-bye.
You bet.
All right, comedian Stephen Bjork right there. Staple on the New England comedy scene. Traveled the world doing stand-up comedy. Some of the biggest casinos in the world. Wow, man. Working with Kevin James in movies. Books putting out. What can you say about that guy? Great story. Great advice for the young comics out there. And more than anything, you know, his work with being a foster parent and dealing with mental illness and using comedy as a way to deal with mental illness, because laughter is the best medicine. So, you know, they say if you see somebody who's not acting the way you want them to act, you know, don't put them down, because you don't know what that person's going through. If you really want to bring them up, you know, tell them a joke. Try to bring them up. Don't try to bring people down, okay? So keep people laughing. Go to work tomorrow, tell somebody a joke, and that'll be the best thing you can do. Till next week, keep them laughing. Good night.